I wasn't gone long, but apparently, long enough for them to breathe a sigh of relief. When I walked back into the office that morning, the celebration still lingered in the air. Laughter, inside jokes, clinking coffee mugs, but not a trace of the guilt they should have felt for the way they'd treated me. They thought my maternity leave was a permanent exit, that they could finally sit back, relax, and erase me from the equation. I used to call it my sanctuary, this office my second home, the place where I built my ideas, my reputation, and my name. And yet, while I was away, my colleagues, the very people I trusted, had painted over everything I'd worked for. Files were missing, projects reassigned, emails that belonged to me rerouted to someone else. They didn't just celebrate my absence, they tried to erase me. And the ringleader, Olivia, she had been my closest ally, or so I thought, until she became my enemy. She smiled at me now, wide and practiced, the same smile she wore at every office meeting. The same one that had convinced our boss I was the problem when I questioned her. If there were ever a villain in this story, Olivia was it, clever, charming, and ruthless under the surface. I remembered the last conversation we had before my leave. I had confided in her, told her about my plans to propose a new project that could double our department's revenue. I expected her support. What I got was a subtle smile and a nod that felt like betrayal waiting to happen. By the time I returned, she'd already sold my idea as her own, pitching it to the higher-ups and earning the credit I'd rightfully deserved. I paused in the doorway, letting the scene settle into my memory. The familiar hum of computers, the low chatter, the scent of brewed coffee. Every detail felt poisoned now. Their excitement was infectious, yes, but it was also a warning. They thought I was powerless, that my maternity leave had taken my bite away. They didn't know the quiet patience I had been cultivating, the meticulous observation I'd been perfecting, while sitting at home, playing the long game. There was Mark, too, lurking nearby. Olivia's shadow, her loyal accomplice. He was always the one who would laugh at her jokes, back her up in meetings, and subtly sabotage anyone she wanted gone. Together, they were untouchable, or so they believed. I remembered how I once trusted him, how his easy charm had made me lower my guard. Now, that charm felt like a knife in the back waiting to strike again. As I walked past them, they didn't even notice me fully. They were too busy whispering to each other, trading glances that reeked of satisfaction. And that was my opening, the first crack in their armor. I could see it, a careless glance, a loose comment, a tiny hint of arrogance. They didn't know it yet, but that arrogance was the first thread I would pull. I made my way to my desk, slow and deliberate, letting the tension settle around me like dust in the sunlight. My chair creaked as I sat down, a familiar sound that suddenly felt foreign in the midst of so much betrayal. Olivia glanced over once, quickly, but her smile didn't falter. Confidence, arrogance, ignorance, they all masked the fear I was about to awaken. I opened my laptop, scrolling through my emails, scanning the projects that had been re-signed in my absence. I noted every oversight, every misstep they'd made, every tiny crack in the carefully constructed facade they had built around themselves. And as I watched, a slow, quiet smile began to curl on my lips. They thought I was gone. They celebrated my absence. But I had returned with the one thing they couldn't escape: the truth. The office air was suddenly heavy. Not one of them sensed it yet, but change had arrived quietly. And subtle unease is always the most dangerous kind. Because when they finally realized I wasn't the same person who left, it would be too late. The first morning back had felt like walking into a theater where everyone had memorized their roles except me. I tried to play along, smiling at Olivia, exchanging polite nods with Mark, yet every interaction left a knot tightening in my stomach. Something was off, but I couldn't yet name it. The red flags appeared slowly, almost innocuously, like small cracks in a glass sculpture. At first, it was subtle favoritism. Olivia seemed to have a new protégé, a young analyst named Jenna, who suddenly got all the opportunities I had once earned. Meetings, high-visibility projects. Praise from the boss. Olivia's gaze would flick toward me, calculating, watching for any reaction, while I noticed the corners of her mouth twitch ever so slightly when I raised a question or suggested an idea. It wasn't outright hostility, But it wasn't support either. Then came the secret calls. I caught her once, mid-laugh at her desk, whispering on her phone as she glanced over her shoulder. The words weren't audible, but the tone was sharp, urgent. Mark hovered nearby, pretending to type on his laptop, but his posture screamed complicity. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to not jump to conclusions. Maybe it was nothing. But instinct is rarely wrong. Money seemed to hang in the air like a shadow I couldn't shake. Expenses I didn't recognize in the department reports. Funds allocated to projects I hadn't approved, invoices with missing signatures. At first, I chalked it up to oversight. But then the whispers began. Accounts being shifted, budgets disappearing, bonuses awarded unevenly. Mark seemed to handle numbers with a fluidity that was impressive. Until you noticed it was suspiciously convenient. And Olivia smiled through it all, effortlessly maintaining a sense of innocence that made me want to scream. The lies were smaller, more subtle. But every one of them was like a drop in a poisoned cup. Tasks I was told were already handled, were neglected. Emails I supposedly never sent were claimed to be lost. Compliments about my absence. Those passive, aggressive remarks disguised as concern. Felt more like gloating than sympathy. And the worst part? The boss didn't notice. They believed the narrative Olivia had carefully constructed. I was out of touch, slow to catch up, maybe even a little fragile after maternity leave. Meanwhile, the emotional strain was wearing me down. I would sit at my desk late into the night, staring at the screen, forcing myself to remain calm. The betrayal, the subtle undermining. It was a constant hum at the back of my mind. I couldn't confide in anyone, because who could I trust? Everyone seemed to have been swept into Olivia's orbit, either knowingly or unknowingly. And Jenna, that new protégée, seemed oblivious to it all, a smiling mask in a web of manipulation. Even small interactions with Olivia sent my heart racing. A casual brush in the hallway. A lingering look during a meeting, a carefully placed comment in the group chat. Each one was coated with a sweetness that made it sting sharper. My mind replayed conversations, dissected gestures, tried to predict motives. Was she plotting something bigger? Or was I reading too much into ordinary office politics? That question alone made my nights restless. By the second week, I began documenting everything. Notebooks filled with observations, who said what, who got what assignment, which projects were reassigned without explanation. I noticed patterns in the favoritism, subtle changes in workflows, that benefited Olivia and Mark, while leaving me constantly reactive, always a step behind. The stress manifested in small ways, sleepless nights, headaches, a trembling edge in my voice when I presented ideas. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, every moment a potential misstep, every glance a potential threat. But the strangest, most unsettling thing was how normal everything appeared to the others. To the boss, to the HR team, to the cheerful faces in the break room, nothing was wrong. They saw the smiles, the polite conversation, the occasional joke. Only I felt the undercurrent, the deliberate misdirection, the carefully concealed malice. And then came the first confrontation. It wasn't dramatic, just a meeting that should have been routine. Olivia suggested a change in project priorities, claiming it was for efficiency. But the choice of projects, my pet project sidelined, a trivial assignment elevated, wasn't random. When I questioned it, her smile tightened. Her words smooth but sharp. Oh, I just thought it would give you time to catch up. We all need a bit of adjustment after time away, don't we? It was a sentence loaded with meaning, casual on the surface but loaded underneath. I nodded politely, forcing agreement, but inside, a flame of suspicion ignited. She was watching me as carefully as I was watching her, waiting for my reaction. And I knew this was just the beginning. Even in my personal life, the strain spilled over. At home, I replayed every conversation in my head. What if I was imagining it all? What if I was being paranoid? But deep down, instinct whispered the truth. Olivia and Mark had shifted the balance of power in my absence. The office I had built my career in was no longer neutral ground. And the thought of leaving it in their hands, of letting them celebrate my absence without consequence, made my blood boil. Late that night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, forcing myself to focus. I couldn't let them see me falter, not yet. Every subtle manipulation, every red flag, was a clue. And clues, when pieced together, formed a map. A map to uncover the betrayal and reclaim what was mine. And as I lay in bed, sleep elusive, I realized something chilling: the villain wasn't obvious. The betrayal wasn't open or brutal. It was quiet, slow, invisible to anyone else. Olivia's smiles, her charm, Mark's loyalty, Jenna's innocence. They were all part of a facade carefully designed to make me doubt myself. But doubts, I decided, could be turned into weapons. The quiet unease that had settled over me was no longer fear. It was anticipation. And when the pieces fell into place, when the subtle signs became undeniable proof, they wouldn't know what hit them. Because the one thing they couldn't escape wasn't just my return. It was me, awake, alert, and armed with the truth. The morning started like any other, quiet, predictable. The office humming with its usual low chatter. But I had a sense of anticipation that made my pulse race. I was about to uncover the truth. The one thing Olivia and Mark had worked so hard to conceal, while I was away. It began with a file that shouldn't have existed. I was searching for a client report, the one tied to my long-term project, when I noticed a folder buried deep in the shared drive labeled Special Accounts. Confidential. My curiosity pried it open, and the contents hit me like a punch to the chest. Invoices, contracts, and bank statements, all signed, all manipulated, showed that Olivia and Mark had siphoned money from the project I had poured my heart into. Not just a little, they had redirected substantial funds to accounts under Olivia's name, covering their tracks with forged approvals and fake reports. Every step of the project I had nurtured was tainted, my contributions erased, my success stolen. I stared at the screen, disbelief rooting me to the spot. My hands shook, my vision blurred. The betrayal was no longer subtle. It was a deliberate, calculated act. Olivia had celebrated my absence not with relief but with triumph. She had stepped into my life, taken my ideas, my work, and, more dangerously, my credibility. And then came the message, the one that confirmed what I feared most, an email from the boss praising Olivia for the success of her project. My own name was absent, replaced entirely. Every line of the email dripped with recognition for Olivia's initiative, for Mark's support, for Jenna's assistance. I was invisible. Anger coursed through me, sharp and bitter. The office, the colleagues, the familiar hum of computers, it all seemed alien now. I had trusted them. I had believed in fairness, in the integrity of the people I worked alongside. And they had torn it all away behind my back. While I had been celebrating the arrival of my child, oblivious to the web of deceit being spun around me. I wanted to scream, to march into Olivia's office and hurl accusations. But I stopped myself. Rage, unchecked, was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not when I needed clarity, strategy, and proof. I needed to understand every layer of their betrayal, every angle they had covered, every misstep I could exploit. I replayed memories of my maternity leave. Every subtle comment, every whisper I had brushed off. Each now took on a sinister hue. Olivia's smiles, the way Mark had hovered protectively near her desk. Even Jenna's eagerness to please. It all pointed to a conspiracy I had been too naive to see. And yet, the depth of it left me staggering. They hadn't just taken credit. They had stolen, manipulated, and rewired the very structure of my professional life. I remembered the secret calls, the late, night emails, the reassigned tasks that now seemed intentional rather than convenient. Each, small injustice had been a brick in the wall they built to lock me out. And as the pieces clicked together, the picture became chillingly clear. They had used my absence as an opportunity to dismantle everything I had created, replacing it with their own narrative, their own faces in the story I had lived. Heartbreak mingled with rage. I felt betrayed not just professionally but personally. I had considered Olivia a friend, a confidante. I had laughed at Mark's jokes, trusted his ease and charm. And all the while, they had plotted. Every betrayal carried a sting far sharper, because it came cloaked in familiarity. I sank into my chair, burying my face in my hands. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk out and abandon the battlefield. But another part, the part that refused to be erased, wouldn't allow it. They had underestimated me, assumed that time and distance would dilute my presence. But I had returned not just with my body, but with my mind, sharp and ready. The emotional strain pressed against me like a vice. Waves of anger, grief, and disbelief crashed through me, leaving exhaustion in their wake. Yet within that storm, a cold clarity began to form. Betrayal, I realized, is most dangerous when it blinds you to your own strength. And I was far from powerless. I began documenting the evidence meticulously. Screenshots, email chains, financial records, project timelines, everything that traced their manipulation. Every forged signature, every altered report, every misallocated fund was cataloged. The betrayal was vast, but so was the proof. And with proof came power. I caught Olivia glancing at me across the office later that afternoon, her expression too casual, her smile a mask that no longer intimidated me. I returned her gaze evenly, a subtle tension hanging between us. She didn't know that I knew. She didn't know that every confident move, every sly remark, every whispered conversation I had recorded in my mental ledger. She had assumed my absence had silenced me, erased me from their world. How wrong she had been. Mark noticed too, of course. His usual bravado seemed slightly off, as if he sensed the tide shifting but couldn't name it. Jenna, blissfully unaware, continued to play her part, oblivious to the deeper currents swirling around her. But I wasn't going to make my next move blindly. Patience had its virtue, and I intended to wield it like a weapon. As I left the office that evening, the weight of the betrayal clung to me, but it was no longer paralyzing. My steps were measured, my mind sharp. I had discovered the truth. I had felt the sting of deception, the heartbreak of stolen recognition, the rage of betrayal. But those emotions were now my fuel. And deep down, a cold, deliberate thought took root: they had built their fortress on my absence. But I had returned with something far more dangerous than presents or complaints. I had returned with knowledge, with clarity, and the first seeds of a plan they could not escape. When I lay in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep, yet strangely exhilarated. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It was concrete, undeniable. Olivia had stolen my work, manipulated my colleagues, and erased my contributions, believing I would never return to challenge her carefully constructed empire. But return I had, and I would not be ignored. Not now. Not ever. Because the one thing they couldn't escape wasn't just me. It was what I now held in my hands, the truth. And the truth, as I would soon show, has a way of demanding justice. The following morning, the office felt different. The hum of computers, the low chatter, even the scent of stale coffee seemed to whisper at me with a new clarity. I had spent the night replaying every moment, dissecting every email, every conversation, every sly smile from Olivia and Mark. Heartbreak had once weighed me down like a lead cloak, but now a fire smoldered in its place. I realized something pivotal: my absence had been their perceived victory. But in their arrogance, they had underestimated one thing. They had underestimated me. Not the woman who left for maternity leave, fragile and trusting. Not the employee who had hoped for camaraderie and fairness. They had underestimated the woman who returned with clarity, with evidence, with patience sharpened like a blade. The turning point came unexpectedly, during a seemingly mundane meeting. I sat at the conference table, papers neatly stacked, laptop open, pretending to review reports as Olivia launched into her presentation. She spoke with the confidence of a queen, outlining successes and taking full credit for initiatives that had been mine. Mark nodded dutifully, occasionally chiming in with supportive observations. Jenna smiled as though the world was perfect, oblivious to the power play unfolding around her. And then, in the middle of her spiel, Olivia made a comment that pierced through the polished veneer. "Honestly," she said, smiling at the boss, "it's amazing how things fall into place when the right people aren't around to complicate everything." I froze. My fingers clenched around the pen on the table. Every eye in the room followed her words. To anyone else, it could have been an innocuous joke, a passing remark. But I heard it for what it was: a gloating acknowledgement of their betrayal. They were celebrating my absence, mocking me even in my presence. Something inside me shifted then. It wasn't just anger, it was clarity. I had spent weeks doubting myself, wondering if I was imagining the subtle manipulations, the favoritism, the hidden transfers of funds. But that moment left no doubt. They had acted while I was away. They had stolen my work, my recognition, my credibility. And they believed they could continue to do so, unchallenged. I took a deep breath, slowly, letting the realization settle. And then I made a decision. I would not leave them in control. I would not let my absence define my power. They had underestimated the strength that came from knowing the truth. And now, armed with knowledge and fueled by the sting of betrayal, I was ready to reclaim what was mine. The emotional transformation was subtle at first. I noticed it in small things, the way I held my posture, straightening my shoulders. The deliberate calm in my voice when responding to Olivia, the precision in my movements, as if each step was calculated and purposeful. I had stopped reacting emotionally to their provocations, and instead began observing them, cataloging their behaviors, noting patterns, and identifying weaknesses. At lunch, I sat alone for a moment, scrolling through the evidence I had painstakingly gathered, spreadsheets showing misallocated funds, email chains proving their manipulation, project documents that bore my fingerprints, but had been rebranded under Olivia's name. The heartbreak from part 3 transformed into focus, a mental armor that made the betrayal fuel instead of drain me. I realized that revenge wasn't about shouting accusations or confronting them recklessly. It was about strategy, patience, and precision. I also discovered a deeper inner strength, one that had been dormant for too long. Motherhood had shown me resilience in ways that no office politics could. If I could protect and nurture a life outside myself, I could certainly protect my career and my dignity. I had faced sleepless nights, endless worry, and physical exhaustion, and yet, I had returned with purpose. The betrayal that once seemed overwhelming now felt like a challenge I was uniquely equipped to meet. The decisive trigger came later that afternoon. I overheard Olivia and Mark in a hushed conversation by the coffee machine. Words like cover, timing, and evidence floated across my path. They were already planning their next moves, thinking I was unaware. That smug confidence, the same one that had fueled their betrayal, was the spark I needed. I would turn their arrogance into their undoing. I left the break room slowly, letting them believe I hadn't heard a thing. My mind raced with ideas, strategies, and contingencies. This was no longer about retaliation born from anger. It was about reclaiming what was mine, correcting the wrongs with careful, deliberate steps. I realized I didn't need to confront them immediately. The power of knowledge, patience, and subtle observation was on my side. By the end of the day, I felt transformed. The weight of betrayal had lifted, replaced by determination. I sat at my desk, drafting a mental roadmap, document everything meticulously, gather proof, anticipate their moves, and strike when the timing was perfect. Each step would be calculated, strategic, and irreversible. They had assumed absence would silence me. But they had not accounted for the inner strength I had cultivated, the clarity of vision I now possessed, or the patience I was willing to wield like a weapon. For the first time since returning, I felt a sense of calm excitement. The fire of rage was no longer consuming. It was propelling me forward. I could feel the tension building, the thrill of the game I was about to play. And in that calm determination, I found power. As I shut down my laptop and gathered my things to leave, I looked at Olivia across the room. Her smile was still there, but the subtle unease in her eyes, a small crack I hadn't noticed before, made me smile quietly to myself. She hadn't seen it coming. Not yet. But she would. And when the time came, there would be no hiding from the truth. Walking out of the office, I carried a quiet confidence, a sense of inevitability that was almost intoxicating. The betrayal had been real, the heartbreak and rage had been sharp, but now they were tools in my arsenal. I wasn't just returning. I was preparing for the reckoning they had unknowingly invited. And as I reached my car, I whispered to myself, a vow of steel, they celebrated my absence. But they will never escape my return. The fire that had been lighting my thoughts since the revelation now needed structure. Fury without a plan is noise. Fury with a map becomes an instrument. I spent the weekend drafting the plan in a notebook, while the house was quiet and the baby slept. Short, precise entries that read more like a forensic checklist than the wild imaginings of a wronged woman. I made copies of everything, screenshots of invoices, calendar entries, email threads, file properties. and the timestamps that betrayed the edits they'd made while I was offline. I exported versions of documents from the shared drive, saved them to an external hard drive, and uploaded copies to a secure cloud account I alone controlled. If Olivia had been careless with signatures and approvals, I would be surgical about preservation. Every forged line, every rerouted invoice, every updated by field that listed her name instead of mine was a thread to be pulled. I found holes, moments where documents had been edited after hours, where approvals showed as auto approved, where numbers in the budget sheet simply didn't add up. For those gaps I needed corroboration server logs, access timestamps, the IT ticket history. I drafted an offhand email to IT, professional, concerned, asking about intermittent access issues on the shared drive. It was a small thing that would generate a ticket, which in turn would become part of a chronology demonstrating who had accessed files when. I didn't reveal suspicion, I only asked for data. IT responded politely. Their automated reply felt like progress. If I wanted Olivia to expose herself, I needed to give her something Chance could chew on, a bait. I created a mock, final proposal file, one that looked valuable, cleanly formatted, plausible projections, and a deliberately suggestive file name. I saved it in a subfolder accessible to the team, but tagged it as confidential, review only. The file contained a single line at the bottom that instructed any approver to initial electronically for audit purposes. It was a minor provocation, staged to test who would touch it and how. I began to monitor discreetly. Not obvious spying, just careful observation: who opened the folder, who forwarded the document, who joked about covering up errors. Olivia continued her nightly habit of lingering late, phone tucked against her ear, laugh low and clipped. Mark's timing was uncanny, always hovering when sensitive documents were discussed. Jenna, still radiant and trusting, clicked through the files but never lingered on the ones that mattered. Each movement fed into the ledger I kept: dates, times, impressions. The financial misdirection was the most dangerous part. Olivia had diverted funds through a series of small reallocations and phantom line items. I created a tiny, legally plausible invoice, an innocuous consulting fee for a vendor that didn't actually exist, and slipped it into the project's payment schedule. The amount was small, not worth criminal attention on its own. But it was designed to appear in the accounts only if someone actively moved money without oversight. If the invoice disappeared into a private account, it would leave a breadcrumb I could trace. I couldn't trust the people who'd already sided with Olivia, but I didn't need to cut everyone off. There were one or two colleagues who respected me and had little reason to lie. I looped them into benign parts of the plan, asking for help reconciling a minor spreadsheet here, requesting a second set of eyes on a client memo there, without revealing the whole map. They became inadvertent witnesses who could corroborate my normalcy and attention to detail, convincing anyone who observed us that I wasn't panicking, I was working. I scheduled a formal project review meeting. Nothing accusatory. Only reconsolidation after maternity leave. I chose a date weeks out, not too soon, giving Olivia time to grow complacent, while I arranged the paperwork and the people. I sent a crisp agenda that included an item called Final Budget Reconciliation. The word, final, was intentional. It suggested closure and implied that all supporting documentation should be ready. I expected Olivia to assume this was bureaucratic housekeeping. That assumption would be a mistake she'd make in confidence. All the while, she smiled. That was the worst part, her visible control. In front of the boss, Olivia's composure was immaculate, confident, polished, and entirely convincing. She accepted praise with the practiced humility of someone who had rehearsed gratitude. Mark played the loyal second. Jenna appeared more luminous by the day, her star rising in the very orbit where mine had once burned brightest. To the casual observer, nothing would seem amiss. Everything, from the outside, looked exactly as Olivia wanted it to. But plans don't move in a vacuum. They're enacted by imperfect human beings. By me, roused from betrayal, and by them, luxuriating in the illusion of power. My traps had to be subtle, because confrontation too early would allow them to cover their tracks. I had to let confidence turn into arrogance, until the very acts that made them feel untouchable would entangle them. So I layered contingencies. If the fake invoice vanished from the ledger, I would push for a formal audit of that fiscal quarter. If Olivia tried to preempt the project review by producing fresh documents, I would present server logs and version histories showing edits made while I was away. If Mark approached me, the riskier move, because he liked to swagger, I would remain composed and record the interaction, letting his own words become evidence should he slip. The psychological part of the plan was as essential as the technical one. I practiced calm answers, neutral phrases that elicited more information than they gave away. That's interesting. Can you show me the approval trail? Or, I must have missed that email, could you forward it? Each question was a small probe, designed to unsettle them without appearing accusatory. People who are hiding something often fill silences. They over-explain. They slip. Weeks passed. I worked like someone on a long, precise heist, except the target was truth. I fed myself on small victories, a server log that confirmed the time Olivia accessed a confidential folder at 2 a.m., a forwarded email chain where Mark had suggested routing an invoice, a casual comment from Jenna about how grateful she was for the opportunity Olivia had given her. Each piece fit the pattern I'd suspected. But Olivia still felt in control. She laughed at the coffee machine, received kudos, and openly took meetings with the boss. She added flourish to her presentations, never once hinting that the floor beneath her might be about to drop. Her confidence made her dangerous. Arrogance makes people careless. Yes, but it also makes them unpredictable. That unpredictability was a risk I had calculated into my strategy. On the eve of the scheduled review, I double-checked every file, every backup, and every contingency. My notebook was a map of chains and connections. My external drive hummed under my desk like a small, patient engine. I felt nervous, yes. But it was the focused kind of nerves that precede something inevitable. As I left the office that night, Olivia stood by the elevator with the boss, laughing. The light from the hallway haloed her silhouette. For a second, she looked invincible. I walked past them with an even step, my face neutral, my heart steady. They had celebrated my absence. They still believed my return meant nothing. What they didn't know was that I had one advantage they hadn't accounted for: time. I had the chronology of their deceit, the physical traces of their greed, and a confidence forged by betrayal and motherhood. I had set the stage. The traps were in place. Now it was a matter of waiting for the next move. From them, or from a system that would finally make their lies undeniable. The review would be tomorrow. The room would be bright, the boss punctual, and Olivia would speak with practiced brilliance. I closed my car door and looked at my phone. One message from home, a photo of the baby sleeping, a small, perfect pause in my day. I breathed in, tasting iron and resolve. Tomorrow would decide where the story bent. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and recycled air. Morning light cut through the blinds in tight bars across the glossy table. People arrived in neat suits, as if they were actors taking their places for the final act. Olivia glided in last, flawless, clutching a tablet like a talisman. She smiled at everyone with that practiced half-light. Enough warmth to disarm, never enough to be real. I sat at the head of the table. The boss took his seat, eyebrows arched, eyes curious. Jenna hovered near Olivia, radiant and nervous. Mark positioned himself on Olivia's side like a second shield. Everyone assumed they knew the script Olivia would summarize. Success. The boss would praise it, I would be the gracious absentee, turned, supportive colleague. That's the confidence arrogance buys you. I began the meeting as planned, calm, measured, procedural. Agenda item 3. Final budget reconciliation. I said, and let the words hang. Olivia's smile tightened, a micro-reaction that would have beaten her if anyone had been watching closely. She wasn't. I pulled up the first slide, an innocuous title. Then I clicked, and the room saw the timeline I had built: timestamps, server logs, exported file versions, and the audit trail that showed edits made at 2 a.m. on nights I was home with my child. There was the innocuous, Odo, approval, flag that had been the key to their scheme. The projector threw up exact times, IP addresses, usernames. Names I knew off by heart. Olivia opened her mouth to interrupt. I let her. Can you explain these access logs? I asked, neutral as stone. Her answer was smooth. Must be an IT glitch. These systems can show oddities. We had a minor sync issue last month. Let's check with IT. Then? I had them on the line before she finished speaking. The IT manager's voice came through the speaker, efficient and clinical. We pulled the audit log at your request, he said. And we see repeated access from Olivia Shaw's account at 2:30 a.m. on 3 separate dates. Those logs match an IP address tied to a residential connection, registered to Olivia Shaw's name. A stifled intake of breath. Olivia's lips whitened. Mark's jaw worked. Olivia's practiced smile frayed around the edges, thin as wet paper. Then I clicked to the next slide, the fake invoice. I watched Olivia's pupils dilate as the name of the phantom vendor, and the routing code appeared. This invoice, I said, was entered into the project ledger on March 12th, and later redirected. The bank transfers for that quarter show a pattern, multiple small reallocations that aggregate into a significant sum. We followed one breadcrumb, and it leads to a shell account under a name linked to Olivia Shaw. Her hand flew to her mouth. That's absurd. I never. You did, I interrupted, and I didn't apologize for the tone. Mark forwarded an email chain recommending the reallocations. I have the timestamps and the message trail. I hit play on a recorded file. The brief, careless voice memo Mark had left to Olivia, joking about routing a harmless fee, and laughing at how easy it was. The laughter echoed, raw and devastating. Mark's face collapsed like a house of cards. The boss's face drained. Is this verified? He asked. Yes. I turned to the IT manager. Can you confirm the server document edits were made from Olivia's account, and that the approvals were generated after those edits? He did. The room's polite hum dissolved into a slow, stunned silence. Conversations that had been small and rehearsed now sounded like a chorus of disbelief. Olivia tried deflection with venom now. Blurred accusations, denials sharpened by fear. She threw out phrases. Planted evidence. Sabotage. Frame job. But anger is a poor surgical tool. It blunts, it misses the finer cuts. Her words were reactive, clumsy. I had kept a final card. I pulled up the secure cloud copy and shared it with the boss and HR Liv. Scanned contracts with my original signatures, versions stamped before, Olivia Shaw, appeared in the metadata. I showed the external backups where the OP dated by fields had been altered after entries were moved. The proof unspooled like film manipulations, reroutes, forged approvals. Jenna's face turned paper, white. She read the documents like someone watching the slow collapse of a fairy tale. Olivia, you said you were helping me learn. She whispered, betrayal trembling through the syllables. Helping by stealing? The boss asked. His voice was small, like someone realizing he'd trusted the wrong person for too long. Olivia's composure cracked. She lunged for explanations that didn't exist. You don't understand context. There's more. But the room no longer offered her the safety of assumption. The bank, the server logs, Mark's recorded laughter. Jenna's innocent testimony. They formed a net that held tighter with every attempt to wriggle free. HR slid into action like a machine built to fix such ruptures. They asked for statements. They requested immediate freeze orders on the accounts in question. Phones appeared. Calls to legal, to finance. The air tasted suddenly metallic, as if the room had been wired and the current had finally been turned on. Olivia moved toward the door, fast, practiced. But the boss blocked her path, voice steady and grave. Olivia, you're gonna come with me to HR, he said. Mark, too. The crowd murmured like surf. People shifted, eyes flickering between the accused and the evidence. Some faces held pity, others incredulity. But no one celebrated. There was a gravity, the sober kind that comes when a lie collapses into ruin. As they were led away, Jenna's gaze found me. For a moment she stood between two worlds, sick with realization, filled with regret. She mouthed, I'm sorry. I couldn't feel vindictive in that moment. The victory tasted like ash when it grazed remorse. But vindication is not cruelty, it's restoration. I'd come to reclaim what was mine, and reclaim I had. Outside the glass walls, news travels fast in a small office. A whispered message reached the finance team. A freeze had been placed on the accounts. The bank had been notified. For Olivia and Mark, The celebration they'd thrown in my absence had become a public unraveling. There would be internal investigations, possible criminal charges, restitution talks. The fortress they'd built with petty lies and forged approvals was already a ruin. The boss motioned me forward. He didn't offer fireworks, only a quiet, grave hand on my shoulder. "You handled this the right way," he said. "We'll do a full audit and involve legal." "I'm sorry. Truly. This happened while you were away. Sorry." It was a small consolation. My heart beat slow, like a drum's last measured pulse. I had expected exhilaration, pure glee, and instead I felt a complex mix: righteous relief, hollowed grief for what had been stolen, and a deep, tired satisfaction. Outside, the hallway felt oddly loud. People stole glances at Olivia and Mark being escorted down the corridor. The elevator doors slid closed on them. Final, inevitable. The office resumed its slow, uncertain rhythm, but the air felt altered. The celebration that had greeted my absence had curdled into something else, a cautionary tale, a scandal that would be retold in whisper and rumor for months. I gathered my things slowly, savoring the normalcy of small gestures. The snap of my notebook, the click of my pen. I thought of the baby sleeping at home, of the quiet life I'd stepped back into when the world felt simple and safe. The revenge had been surgical, precise, necessary. It had not been about spectacle, it had been about proving that absence wasn't permission. As I left the building, the city air hit my face, cool and real. My phone buzzed with a single message from Jenna. I didn't understand. "I'm so sorry." I stared at it, feeling the numbness in my chest shift into something warmer, an ember of closure. They had celebrated my absence. They had thought my maternity leave meant erasure. But I had returned with the one thing they couldn't escape: truth. The office was quieter now. Too quiet, some might say. The usual hum of gossip and nervous small talk was replaced by a sense of cautious order. Olivia and Mark were gone, suspended pending the full audit and legal investigation. Jenna, still processing everything, avoided eye contact but seemed relieved, as if the weight of silence had been lifted. And I sat at my desk, a strange mix of exhaustion, satisfaction, and clarity coursing through me. The weeks that followed were almost surreal. HR worked quickly to correct the financial discrepancies, ensuring restitution where possible. Our boss, who had been blind to the manipulation before, now relied on me for guidance in reorganizing the department. I was given a lead role on the next project, not as a reward, but because I had earned it through diligence, resilience, and integrity. Colleagues who had whispered behind my back now treated me with the respect that had always been my due. The absence that had once seemed like a void became a testament to my return, and the betrayal that had seemed insurmountable was now a story of triumph. I still think about Olivia. The way she had smiled, confident, thinking herself untouchable. The way Mark had hovered, ready to cover her mistakes, assuming their partnership made them invincible. I imagine them now, in their own private reckoning, learning the hard way that arrogance is brittle and trust misplaced. They had gambled with deceit, and the house of cards had fallen. Jenna and I began rebuilding our professional rapport, carefully and cautiously. I couldn't ignore her naivety, but she was earnest, and she needed guidance to navigate the treacherous waters of office politics. Mentoring her felt like reclaiming a piece of the world I had lost, turning the betrayal into a chance to empower someone who might have been drawn into the same trap I'd endured. There was a strange beauty in the aftermath, a cinematic quiet after the storm. The betrayal had left scars, yes, but it had also awakened something in me that I had never fully recognized: my ability to endure, to strategize, and to rise without compromise. The office, once a battlefield, had become a stage where I proved that presence, patience, and preparation could outmaneuver deception. The poetic justice wasn't merely that Olivia and Mark faced consequences. It was in the subtle symmetry of the story. They had thrived in my absence, believing I would not return. They had celebrated the silence I left behind. Yet their very celebration had been the instrument of their undoing. Every document forged, every email rerouted, every misdirected approval had left a trace. The very hubris that had made them reckless had illuminated the path of truth. In other words, they had dug the trap themselves, and I had merely waited for the moment to reveal it. Even as I walked the floors of the office, colleagues greeting me with tentative smiles or nods of acknowledgement, I felt a calm strength. There was no need for vengeance beyond what had already been orchestrated. Justice, when carefully crafted, has a way of speaking louder than anger ever could. The satisfaction came not from humiliation or public shaming. It came from the perfect alignment of truth and consequence, and from the knowledge that integrity cannot be erased by absence or deceit. At home, the air feels lighter. The baby sleeps, the world outside moves on, and I have reclaimed my life, both professionally and personally. Betrayal had tried to define me, but I chose how the story would end. The sense of liberation is intoxicating. A quiet, powerful freedom that no one can take from me. I look back at the journey from that first shocking morning to this point and recognize that every subtle observation, every patient move, every careful step was necessary. The heartbreak, the sleepless nights, the gnawing anxiety, they were the crucible that forged the strategy, the precision, and the inner strength that ensured victory. And victory, in this case, was not just revenge, it was restoration. I want you, watching this story unfold, to feel the weight of what betrayal can do, but also the potential within you to respond. Have you ever been erased, undermined, or betrayed while trusting someone you believed in? Did you feel the world had moved on without regard for your absence? Share your experiences in the comments. I want to hear your stories. Let's turn betrayal into empowerment together. If you've ever been in my shoes, know this. The strength to reclaim what was taken is within you, sometimes lying dormant until the right moment. Justice doesn't have to roar. It can be quiet, calculated, and absolute. And when it strikes, it resonates beyond the personal, echoing as a reminder that deceit, arrogance, and exploitation always leave traces that can be revealed. I've learned that absence may be celebrated, but presence, when wielded with truth and patience, is unstoppable. And here's the line I want you to remember. The one that sends a shiver down my spine every time I think of it. They cheered when I was gone, but they never counted on the shadow that walks in my footsteps. And shadows have long memories. So, take a moment. Reflect. Share your thoughts below. And if stories of resilience, clever revenge, and quiet justice inspire you, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. Because sometimes, the person you think is gone is simply waiting for the perfect moment to return.